All right, let's talk about muscles and how they work and their anatomy, of course. First of all, it's just pretty amazing, the intricacy and the number of muscles you have, like over 600. So just spending some time, remember zygote body? Go back to that thing, play around with that a bit. Might give you some other links just to play around with getting a sense of the depth and the differences of muscles. It's pretty incredible. Major muscle functions. I'm going to leave that to you. It's in your book. We'll talk about it in our Zoom room. I'm going to add number 5, sphincters, which help regulate entry and exit in tubes. For your skeletal muscles that you have control over specifically, right? That's this sphincter here. We don't like to think of our mouth as a sphincter, but it is. So lips, right? Helps regulate what can come in and out. Opposite in on the rectum, you also have a skeletal muscle sphincter that you have control over in there as well. And when they work, it's nice. When they don't, we notice. Okay, so 4 other major functions. Find them, we'll talk about them in the Zoom room. And we're gonna dive into skeletal muscle organ anatomy. So if it is a organ, it must have 2 or more tissues. You got it. So we're going to talk about those tissues and some other aspects of skeletal muscles. First of all, know that they are highly vascularized. So unlike your joints, right, with those ligaments and cartilage, where there's not a rich blood supply, your muscles are different. Highly vascularized, rich blood supply. You have high energy demands in your muscles. So it's going to use the unit of energy used by all of your cells is this little molecule, called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You take physiology, you'll learn all about it. But for now, just know it's kind of the unit of energy. I think of it as the battery of your cells. It's how it gets all of its works done, including contracting a muscle, using thousands of ATP right now. So how do you make ATP? Well, you need some oxygen. You also need an energy source, which comes from the food that you ate. How does it get to your cells? Blood, right? So your blood's delivering oxygen and things like glucose or fats or proteins that are going to allow your body to make that ATP for those high energy demands for all that movement. Also aids in heat dispersal. So as you learned in the integumentary system, the body takes the heat that gets generated by the core of the body and then can send it out to the skin where it can cool through sweating, evapotranspiration. Right? Remember that papillary layer, that undulating papillary layer with all those capillary beds, the caps and the paps, that bring all of a lot of your blood closer to the surface and lets it cool. So having lots of blood vessels in your muscles that are generating all of that heat as you're moving around, then it can easily disperse, take that heat away if you've got lots of blood vessels in your muscles. You also need nerves. In order for your muscles to contract, every time that happens, your nervous system has to tell your muscles to contract. So there's a signal that starts in your brain, goes down your spinal cord, comes through a nerve, and then lands on individual muscle cells and says, hey, contract so that thing can move. So lots of nervous tissue in your cells as well. As I said, if muscles are organs, then we've got to have multiple tissues. Of course, we have nervous tissue in there, right? Because you've got to have that to excite your muscles. The actual fabric structure of your muscles is comprised of 2 basic types of tissues. You guessed it, one of them is going to be the skeletal muscle tissue, right? That's the one that's striated, parallel. We're going to get deeper into the roles of those striations. And the other one's connective tissue. And you've learned about that dense, regular connective tissue. That's the image on the bottom in tendons, right? So that's The muscle tissue, so it's this skeletal muscle tissue that can actually shorten, do the contraction. That's what the nerve, your nervous system is telling to shorten. The tendons, they themselves can't shorten. They don't have the ability to contract. But what they can do is act like a rope in between your bones and your muscles and pull on those bones and get your skeleton to move around. Skeletal muscle, dense, regular connective tissue is found in the tendons. We're also going to find some dense, irregular connective tissue, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. First of all, when you think about muscles, I often think about dinner. Okay, like not eating humans, but next time you look at a roast, if you're omnivore or carnivore of any sort, what you might notice is there's this organization in the muscle itself. So that when you cut it like against the grain, right, which would be equivalent, right, this bicep muscle of mine, if I were to cut it, that's not easy to do, cut it this way, right, that would be against the grain. My muscle fibers are lining up this way, cut it 90 degrees, and it might look something like this. Well, you'll notice there are these little compartments in this organization of the muscle. Guess what makes that organization? Nice job, nailed it, connective tissue. So here's the basics of the organization of your connective tissue. You have the tendon, and the tendon is connected to these 3 layers, or your book calls them 3 sheaths of connective tissue. And that's the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. So let's walk through that. The epimysium is what goes around the entire outside of your muscle. Epi means on top of, so it's just this connective tissue around the muscle. And that tends to be more of like dense, irregular connective tissue. But we're just happy to know that it's some kind of dense connective tissue, lots of collagen fibers that surrounds your muscle. And then if I have a group of cells, so this would be a single cell, this would be a single cell, here's a single cell. So if I have a group of cells, then that is surrounded by perimysium. And I call a group of cells a fascicle. Fascinating, I know. Thought I had that written down on this slide. Let me write it down for you. So this is a group of cells. Hello, pen. Get to work. Awesome. Okay, so a group of muscle cells is called a fascicle, and that is surrounded by the perimysium. So this thing around here would also be the perimysium. Then each individual muscle cell, ooh, I know, so many words. So I don't know why they do this too, but a muscle fiber is the same thing as one muscle cell. So when you're reading about that in the book, or I throw it out casually as if you already know what it is, a muscle fiber is one muscle cell. Right, you're building your neurological pathways. Say it out loud with me. One muscle fiber is one muscle cell. Okay, and that is surrounded by the endomysium. Endo means within, right? So this is deep within the muscle, around every single one of your muscle fibers. So what that serves to do is to make this web, this network of connective tissue that is fully integrated throughout the muscle, and it helps to organize it. So for example, if we go back to our roast, when you look at these divisions through here, right? These are connective tissues, perimysium, bundles of muscle cells. Voila. All right, so more on skeletal muscle organ anatomy. What's next? Connective tissues. So we've talked about it's got blood vessels, we've got nervous tissue. We also have these connective tissues. And what are their roles? Well, they're going to reinforce the muscles. When you're really lifting some weights and exerting stuff, you want something that's kind of going to give your muscle a nice little hug, some reinforcement, like don't overdo it. Let's not damage ourselves. Okay, so that's part of the role of the connective tissue. They're also going to transmit that pulling force to bone. We've talked about that with the tendons, right? Plug into that periosteum so we can, the contraction work is being done by the skeletal muscle, but it's also pretty fragile, right? That can get damaged pretty easily. The connective tissue, that's pretty tough. So we're going to use the connective tissue to actually plug into the muscle, or excuse me, the connective tissue to plug into the bone to pull on those bones. It also helps to organize our muscle, and it's going to give these entry and exit routes for things like nerves and blood vessels. Awesome. So one of your questions on your study guide, you've got it out, right? You're working on it. You've noticed what we've already talked about, what we haven't talked about. You're taking some notes, getting yourself ready, learning some stuff. All right, good work, good work. So one of the questions is, how do muscles connect to bones and other muscles? And what is the difference between a direct and indirect attachment? So let's attack that question. You will notice a variety of muscles here and a variety of ways that they are attached. Sometimes we have tendons, but things like, here's this pectoralis muscle. Notice that it's basically directly attached to the sternum and the clavicle here. And once again, right? So some tendons are short, some are longer. So there's a difference in ways muscles are attached. When it is direct, that means the epimysium. Oh man, did you already forget? What's the epimysium? Oh, you didn't forget. Good. That, right? That's the connective tissue that wraps all the way around the muscle, helping reinforce it. It's that reinforcing hug. Love you, don't overdo it. The collagen fibers and that epimysium is what's going to interlock and fuse into that periosteum that's surrounding the bone. So for example, with your pectoralis major, which is what this muscle is, you have this direct attachment to the sternum and this clavicle of the pectoralis. Cool. Here's another one that you will be learning. This is a pair of muscles that have opposite movements. One of the movements that your pectoralis major can do is, do you remember medial rotation of the arm? I'm going to bend my arm so you can see it better. So expand my elbow. So if I do medial rotation, right, I'm rotating my shoulder towards my median, right? So I can use my pectoralis muscle to do that. In fact, if I stick my hand right on the top of my armpit, I can kind of feel that muscle contract. Just check it out, right? So that's medial rotation. And then there's something else has to do, lateral rotation. Where would that muscle be? Would it be on the front of my body? Good job. No, it's going to be on the opposite side, right? Because it's the opposite movement. So you're getting the hang of this. What's that muscle? Well, this one's called the infraspinatus. I know. Who comes up with these things? Right, it's closer to the spinal cord. I don't know. All right. So infraspinatus muscle, you'll notice, is on the scapula, and its origin is directly on the scapula. And it also has a connection here to the humerus, and that's one of the muscles that allows you to laterally rotate your shoulder, part of your rotator cuff series. Indirect. So you have two options for indirect attachments. They can be tendons or they can be aponeuroses. Tendons you've learned, about. Those are going to be connected to the epimysium. So the epimysium is going to go around that muscle, and then it's going to just fuse into the tendon, right? So it's like you've got this complex web going around the muscle, and then all those collagen fibers manage to kind of line up, find their way, make it into the tendon, and then that tendon's going to connect to that periosteum. Classic biceps brachii. Yeah? Okay. Here's another one. Your biceps femoris muscle. Might be a new one for you, but it is one of your hamstrings. Think about those hammies. It's on the back of your legs. These are muscles that allow you to flex your knee. If you're flexing your knee, are you bending it or are you straightening your knee? You sure? Okay, good. Yeah, you're bending your knee, right? So to flex your knee means you're bending your knee. And if you do that, you will be so kind at this moment to flex your knee on you can actually feel them on both sides. On the lateral side of your knee, I can feel this like really ropey tendony thing. That is the tendon of your biceps femoris muscle. It's on the lateral side of your knee. If you're on the medial side of your knee and if you're like sitting down and then you keep your leg is bent, let me use my anatomical terms. If your knee is flexed and you're sitting down, and then if you do something called an isometric contraction, which means your foot is going to stay on the ground, it's not going to move, but you're going to try and pull it as if you were moving it backwards. See what I'm saying? So it doesn't move, but you're flexing stuff. Then I can really feel those tendons both on the lateral side and the medial side. Those medial side are the other hamstrings. You have 3 muscles that make up your hamstrings. The one on the lateral side is your biceps femoris muscle. The ones on the medial side are your semitendinosus and semimembranosus. So tendons, right? You can also see them all over your hands. Okay. The other one, indirect attachment, is an aponeurosis. Now, instead of having a rope-like tendon, this is more like a flat sheet. We're still working with what tissue? Good job, dense, regular connective tissue. All those collagen fibers are lined up parallel. But now we've got a whole sheet. Instead of just plugging into one spot on a bone, now we've kind of got to spread that out over a larger area. And the classic one is called your linea alba, or the white line of the abdominal muscles. So you actually have several abdominal muscles, but on the very top, so if we just took off your skin, right underneath that, what we would see is the linea alba, which is this, let's see, this thing right here. I mean, the white thing. Come on, pen. There we go. Perfectly outlined. So that is connective tissue that's helping these muscles, which are your external obliques, to connect to the center of your abdomen. Now you've noticed, right, you don't have a bone that goes from your sternum down to your pubic bone, right? That's all kind of open area. There's no really place for those muscles to attach to, so we have this connective tissue that those abdominal muscles are connecting to. And of course, it's under the linea alba, or that white line. You take off that aponeurosis, underneath is your six-pack, the rectus abdominis. Here's another one. This is on your lab muscle list. This is the latissimus dorsi. So now we are on the back of the body. And here you can see this attachment to the latissimus dorsi starts up here at T7, that's the thoracic vertebrae number 7, and goes down to L5, that's your lumbar vertebrae number 5. But it makes this white, kind of just like a sheet of connective tissue, an aponeurosis. So places where there's a really long place where the muscle attaches to the body, we tend to see these aponeuroses versus one little small spot, which tends to be tendons or perhaps a direct attachment. Okay. So let's talk, now that we've talked about attachment, let's talk about some movements. So you might have noticed in those images that each muscle has, right, it's going to connect at least 2 different places in the body. And there's always an origin, which is the bones that have the least amount of movement, and insertion, the bone with most of the movement. So for example, in your latissimus dorsi, notice the origin is along the spine, and then the insertion is on the humerus. And its major job is to do shoulder extension. Pulls your humerus backwards, extension. So the insertion is on the humerus. Something to notice, and that you'll be working on with your lab assignment this week as you're drawing muscles onto skeletons, that muscles always need to cross a joint in order to cause movement. Because if they were just, well, right? If I had a muscle that started on the ulna, maybe this is one point of attachment, and then it attaches here. Can it move anything when it contracts? No, it'll get a little shorter, but it can't move anything. So if I want to move something, what I need to do is erase that business. I need it to start somewhere on a bone, cross a joint, and then land on a bone somewhere on the other side of the joint. Now I could, with this muscle, I could move my wrist. Yeah? Yeah. And so what would I call? I would call this the origin, right? I'm moving the wrist. And then this one would be my insertion. Think about your biceps. What's moving when your bicep moves? Your forearm. Happens to be connected to your radius is the insertion point for your biceps. So your radius moves up towards the origin, which is up on the upper end of your humerus, as well as your scapula. Did we talk about everything? Yep. Yep. So look at these for a moment and see if you can figure out what would be your guess. Where's the origin? Where's the insertion of these muscles? We've already done the latissimus dorsi, so that one's a review. Look at that, aponeuroses. Right? Okay, good job. Right, so origin is here and actually goes long origin. Here's the insertion. What would you guess for this one in the middle? Oh, don't worry about what it's called. Yeah, I would guess too, moving the leg, right? So I'm going to put the insertion down here and the origin up here on the pelvis. And what do you think it's going to do? What action? It shortens. How's that leg going to move? All right, so let's narrow it down. Do you think it would do abduction? Like going, right? Abduction? Imagine my arms or legs. Or is it going to do? This one is actually called your gracilis, if you really want to know. But it is, it does adduction. Where would I need the muscle that's going to do abduction? Oh, look no further, right? Here's my gluteus medius. Notice it's on the pelvis and the part of the femur. We call it the trochanter. Don't worry about that. Or worry about it, whatever. You can worry about whatever you like to worry about. But I don't think you should. When this contracts, it's going to shorten, right? So if this shortens, what's going to happen to this bone? Woo! It's going to go outward. So that is one of your major abductors, the gluteus isn't sitting too much anyway. And just like try it out. See if you can feel your gluteus medius doing its job. So, question. This should be in blue for Zoom. So what's the advantage there of having all these tendons cross your wrist or the tendons crossing your ankle as opposed to having the full-on muscle coming through and then attaching directly to the bones that they're moving? Got some good ideas. I look forward to hearing them. All right, so that's kind of the gross anatomy of muscles. Let's talk about cellular anatomy and how this stuff works. You learned muscle fiber is one muscle cell. If we look inside of one muscle cell, remember this is surrounded by, what's it called? The connective tissue around one muscle cell? Yeah, endomysium. Anytime you see mys, my, that's muscle stuff. So endomysium, good review. So you'll notice once we get inside of the muscle cell, you see a bunch of other little fibers. Let's not call them fibers because the whole cell is called a fiber. So this thing is called a myofibril. Woo! Myofibril. See, MY, muscle. So these are the smaller, longer proteins that are actually inside of the cell. Let's talk about how all these cells are oriented. So here's our fave, the biceps brachii. In what direction are the muscle fibers or these cells going to shorten during contraction? So remember that these muscle cells, right, are these long cells. So are they going to be oriented in this direction so that they shorten? So they go, okay. See how this is getting complicated. So if they shorten, then they're going to get shorter like this, right? Or our other option is, what if they're oriented more like B? So B would be like they're oriented more like this, and when they shorten, they get shorter like that. Which one do you think is the case? Hey, hey, they're oriented that way. So notice the striations are actually perpendicular to the length of our muscle cells or our muscle fibers. And so the length of the cell tends to be the length of the muscle, and then those muscle striations are going to be perpendicular to that. Let's look at that a little more closely. Muscle striations, all we mean is there are light bands and dark bands. What makes those? Well, a little thing called myosin and actin. So here's one sketch of it. We're going to look at another. But what you're looking at here is called, here's your new term. I know, it's so term heavy, is a sarcomere. So what a sarcomere is this is the contracting unit of the muscle. Meaning that the sarcomere can shorten when it's going to contract, and it's going to lengthen again when the muscle cell relaxes. And these are stacked end to end all along the length of the muscle. So when you look at something like this, each one of those little double stripies, you're looking at a bunch of sarcomeres going end to end, end to end, end to end, all the way along the length of the muscle. Let's zoom in even more. Okay, so now you're looking at like this image, but even closer up. It's clearly a different image, but that's the idea. So now we're really zooming into the muscle and what those striations look like, those light and dark bands. Well, here's what they line up with regarding How do I word this? I don't know. Let's start over. Sarcomere. This middle part right here is called the M line, which is nice because it's the middle. It starts with an M. These darker lines here that you see are the ends of the sarcomere, and somebody called those the Z lines, or you might hear them being called the Z disc. I think probably because they kind of make, zigzaggy Z's. So far, so good. Cool. And then attached to the M line, you're going to love this. M stands for middle. It also stands for myosin. I'm running out of room. Perfect. So here's the middle, the M line. These thicker filaments are called myosin. They're also called the thick filament. Right? See how it's darker here? Okay. These blue ones are called the thin filaments, and one of the primary proteins in that thin filament is actin. Cool. And then there's this other thing that looks like a spring or a coil, and that is called titin. Oops, titin, or an elastic fiber. And that's basically a sarcomere. M lines in the middle, Z discs on the ends for the borders. When you have the M line, you're going to add the thick filaments, the myosin. Notice they have these goofy looking paws on them. That's what they do. And then the thin filaments, actin, and then these coily things, the titin and the titin. So let's talk about what those things do. Whoa, too fast. So, once again, this doesn't work so well for me to show you the videos as we go. So if you haven't watched it already, I encourage you to stop and watch this sliding filament video. And essentially, here's what you're going to see. This purple thing, this myosin, is going to crawl along the actin. So these heads actually move. It's amazing. So you can imagine, right? So here are the myosin heads, and they actually crawl like this. And as they do that, they're grabbing the actin and they're pulling it. So your muscles are moving by pulling. The way they get shorter is that myosin is pulling the actin closer to the middle, the M line. I invested in acting, in case you don't want to stop and watch that video. Okay, so here's your opportunity to quiz yourself. Because you're building, right? I can't do it for you. I would love to do it for you. But you have to build your own neurological pathways of what this thing looks like. And one way to do that is to draw this stuff out. So take a moment and in your notes, draw out a sarcomere. Don't look at your book. It's not how you're going to learn it. Here's what happens if you don't look at your book while you're trying to draw, is you actually figure out what you know and you don't know. The first time I do a sarcomere, oh, no, where is the myosin attached to anyway? Is it attached to the M line and the Z disc? Oh crap, I didn't realize I didn't know that. So do yourself a favor, don't have your book open, don't have the next slide or the previous slide. Give yourself 2 minutes and just do your best sketch. No one's gonna see it, it doesn't matter what it looks like. If you couldn't hear that, I said, no one's gonna see it, it doesn't matter what it looks like. So just sketch it out. And then once you have that, what changes happen? That's some great grammar. So what changes happens when that sarcomere contracts? How's it going to look different? And then what do you think it's going to look like if you stretch it? You stretch it too far. Okay, so when you're ready, continue. You did it, right? You ready? Okay. Don't cheat yourself. Treat yourself. Don't cheat yourself. Here's what it looks like. Relax sarcomere up on top. Notice, one thing I really want you to notice is that when the sarcomere is relaxed, are the myosin and actin overlapping? Yes, because if they weren't overlapping, the myosin would be like, I can't, there's nothing to grab, nothing's gonna happen, right? They have to start overlapped if this, oh, that looks better. If the myosin's actually gonna grab the actin and make it shorten, right? If it's out here, myosin's like, there's nothing to grab. So they've got to start overlap. And then as the myosin pulls the actin, it's going to get shorter, and then those actins start to actually get to the end line, and sometimes they actually overlap each other. Cool. What if we stretch it? You ever overstretched a muscle? Hurts, right? Why? Well, let me show you. So remember the yellow coily thing? What was that called? Yep, the titin or the elastic fibers. Yep. So normally during contraction here, I know this is, woo. So all this stuff through here, you can basically, that's your titin or your elastin. Your elastic fiber. Are you convinced? Let's go back. Right? So remember, see, this is where we're drawing it, you're sure. That the titin is between the Z line and your myosin. Yeah? Okay. So when you're doing normal contraction, that's kind of coiled up. If you start to extend it, that coil that's normally there, woo, overdid it. And the contraction is going to start to get pulled apart. If you overextend it, holy moly, look at this. Oh no, right? There's barely any overlap between your myosin and your actin, and your muscles are going to have a really hard time contracting, which is why you have some pain sensors that let your body know if you are overstretching a muscle. You can actually snap some of that stuff, and then you have to repair it. And that's all work. And your body's not really into that, so I'd rather not have to repair the work. So stop it. So when it's overextended, that titin gets pulled too far. Myosin and actin no longer overlapping. Repairs have to be made. So what's the role of titin? Good job. Yeah, it's to prevent your muscles from being overstretched. Okay, so there is a disease called muscular dystrophy. And there are actually lots of ways one has muscular dystrophy, but the most prevalent one is called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And that's a genetic disease that causes misformation or no formation at all of a protein called dystrophin. And that's kind of interesting because actually it's one of the biggest proteins your body makes is dystrophin. And its job is to stabilize the sarcomeres. It connects the sarcomeres to, you have little tiny cytoskeletons, so miniature skeletons made up of protein inside of your cells. So it helps stabilize the whole thing. So if that's if somebody inherits the mutation that causes dystrophin, or the allele that causes dystrophin, to be misshaped or not to form at all, then the stability of that whole muscle cell is compromised. And one of the things that happens is because it's pretty delicate tissue, without that reinforcement from the dystrophin on the inside, then notice what happens here. If I don't have dystrophin, what do you see happening? Oh, calcium. Remember our calcium connection? Aha. So calcium, too much calcium comes into the cell, and that's a problem because calcium is charged. And if you have too much calcium, it actually damages the muscle fibers, the actin. And if the actin's damaged, well, then the muscle doesn't work very well. You get damaged muscle, and that gets replaced with scar tissue. And then you get all the symptoms that come along with muscular dystrophy. As I said, this particular one is a genetic disease, and it happens to be a genetic disease that is that's sex linked. Oh, what does that mean, Erin? All right, I'll give you the quick version. So if you are a female human, you have 2 X chromosomes. Well, the average female. Okay, there's XXX, we're not gonna get to that. Okay, if you're a male, you are most likely XY. What does that mean? Well, the X chromosome is longer than the Y chromosome. And when they duplicate, this one looks like an X and this one kind of looks like a little Y. That's how they got their names. Anyway, this was supposed to be the short version. Okay. So the X chromosome is longer than the Y chromosome. And on this portion of the X chromosome, there are some genes that are really important. One of them is whether or not you have color vision. Another one is the gene for dystrophin. Now, normally the way genetics works is with all your other chromosomes, right? They're all the same length and you get 1 chromosome from your mom and you get 1 chromosome from your dad, which means that for every gene, you have 2 copies. If you are a male and you are XY, that means for all these genes in this portion of the X chromosome, you only have 1 copy because the Y chromosome is shorter. What does that mean? Well, that's all fine unless you have a version of the gene that doesn't work so well. In this case, in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, if you happen to have inherited the version of the gene that makes it so you don't make the dystrophin or you don't make it very well, then you've only got 1 copy. You don't have a backup. And so you end up with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, if you're a woman, if you're XX, you might have 1 copy that doesn't work so well, but you might have 1 copy that's great. It works. Do you have muscular dystrophy? Nope. Only need 1 copy for this whole thing to work. So that's why men are more prone to Duchenne muscular dystrophy as well as color blindness because they've only got 1 copy of each of those genes. You're welcome. Now you know. Okay. There is on your study guide a bonus question about the role of calcium in muscle contraction. So if you're on the bonus question train, stick with me. If you're not, fast forward the next, 5 minutes. Okay. What is this? Oh, you got it. This is your friend myosin, your newfound friend. This is the thin filament or actin. And all this is showing is this myosin head doing its job of pulling the actin right in towards the M line. And in order to do that, it has to connect to the actin and it has to pull it and then it has to disconnect and then pull it again. And that's kind of what it does again and again and again. It needs some energy to do that. Remember I talked about ATP, there it is. So it needs some energy to move that little head. Wait, we were talking about calcium, right? Yeah, I didn't forget, okay. So notice that this myosin is binding to actin. Here's the deal. It can't always do that. Sometimes the actin is blocked. Where's the actin? I can't see it. I can't find it. What's it blocked by? Another protein, of course. It's blocked by this protein called tropomyosin. So here in this video, or in this picture, the actin are these little blue balls. That's the actin. And the tropomyosin is this long kind of filamentous, maybe a different color would be better. I wish I had different colors. Okay, wishes were fishes. Okay, so here's the tropomyosin. So it is blocking the actin. So the myosin can't find it. If it moves, suddenly the myosin can see and it can actually bind to the actin and do its job. So something has to move tropomyosin out of the way. You ready for it? Here comes the calcium. So the calcium is going to bind. I know, you're just dipping your toe into physiology. It's really fun. You love it already? Okay, so calcium binds to this protein called troponin. Super cool. This whole thing works? What? I know. So calcium binds to troponin, and then troponin has this little system on it that just totally moves okay, so let's, okay, I got it. On the fly. So if this cup is the troponin and my arm is the tropomyosin, right? Then here's the, yep, okay. Troponin's the cup, right? So if the calcium, which is going to be my mouse, so if the calcium, make sure this, okay, nothing. So the calcium is going to go into this tropomyosin, and that causes the, excuse me, back it up. Calcium is going to go into the troponin, and that causes kind of this physical movement, and the tropomyosin is going to move out of the way. And now the myosin can now bind to the actin. The animations are better. Oh, that's a great question. Where does the calcium come from? Glad you asked. Well, oh, there's my mouse. Inside of the troponin. Calcium is stored in something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is that periwinkle purpley thing. Check it out. What's it remind you of? Oh, you must be hungry. I think of Swiss cheese too. Okay, yeah, it kind of looks like a spider web or this network or this holy kind of Swiss cheese. So, but what you'll notice is it has a lot of surface area and it encircles around the myosin and the actin, these groups of myofibrils. So inside of that is stored the calcium. When the calcium gets released from that sarcoplasmic reticulum, then the calcium can bind to the troponin and the tropomyosin can move and the myosin can bind to the actin. How does it get released? Good question. Hold on to your seats. First of all, notice these guys. What are these? These are a bunch of mitochondria. Why is that important? What have you learned since like 5th grade? Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Why are they called that? Because they make the ATP, which is the energy that allows the walking. Okay, back to the calcium. What releases the calcium? I just had to give you one more image of that sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? Lots of surface area. You need lots of surface area so it can be quickly released and have conversations with what's this thing called? Troponin. What was this? Calcium. Okay. Here's what releases it. Every one of your muscle cells has a neuromuscular junction. Neuro meaning neuron, right? So part of the neuron is having a junction with, they are meeting with your muscle, neuromuscular junction. When electrical impulse, which is called an action potential, moves its way down the axon and arrives at this axon terminal, then that releases a series of physiological steps you will learn about next semester. I hope we get to spend that next semester together. Or you can spend it with Misha, he'll be teaching it too. You can choose. Both great options. Anyway, so the action potential gets down the axon, releases these neurotransmitters, which then sends the signal to the, what was that purple thing called? The sarcoplasmic reticulum to release the calcium. And that's it. Right? Signal from the nervous system. release the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, release the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's going to bind with the troponin. The troponin is going to move the tropomyosin away from the actin, and then the myosin can bind to the actin and walk. Calcium, I know, it's such a diverse little ion. So it's great if you have just the right amount. Of course, you have too much, damages the cell, causes scar tissue, muscular dystrophy. Not fun. So that leads us to talking about a motor unit. And that has to do with the conversation between the nervous system and your muscular system, which happens at these neuromuscular junctions. Oh, you were wondering how it's spelled? There it is, neuromuscular junction. Here's a micrograph of it, what it looks like. Here's a drawing of it. Why do I have to say that? Okay, so here's motor unit 1, here's motor unit 2. Note that each one of these motor units has how many axons? 1. 1 axon is in each motor unit. Now that axon can branch, but it's still considered 1 axon that comes from the spinal cord. Like here's where it's originating, which is cool. Like your axons that moves, it's like telling the muscles that are actually in your hand to move, right? That axon has to travel from my cervical vertebral spine down my arm all the way here. It's a really long cell. Okay, so that electrical impulse goes down and we have our motor unit, 1 axon, and then we have, this one is innervating 1, 2 cells. This motor unit is innervating 1, 2, 3 cells. Now, if this drawing was complete, every single one of these muscle cells, also known as, nice job, my muscle fibers, would have a neuromuscular junction. So every single muscle cell has 1 neuromuscular junction, and a motor unit is 1 axon, and each of the muscle cells that it forms a neuromuscular junction. Okay. I'm not going to say again, you could back it up if you wanted to. Okay. So the cool thing to know about motor units is this, is some motor units are about power. Get the job done with a lot of force. Some motor units are about precision. Like I just will need to move it. I just really need this to be precise and particular, and I just need to move it a little bit. Precision tends to be I'm just going to contract a few muscle cells at once, right? So precision would be here. I need, oh, come on. That would be precision. I'm only, with each one, my axon, when it fires, I'm only going to contract 5 muscle cells. Not 5 muscles, but just 5 cells within a muscle that probably has like thousands and thousands of cells. Okay? Just a little thing. Versus if I have 1 axon and it branches 1,000 times. And so when that 1 axon fires, I'm going to instantly, simultaneously contract 1,000 muscle fibers. That, my friends, is all about power. So here are 2 of your skeletal muscles. One's your temporalis. Ooh, check out this muscle attachment. Is that direct or indirect? See how I did that? Good job. Yep, it's direct. And ooh, does that look like a tendon to you? Looks like a tendon to me. So that would be indirect. Yep, to your mandible. So, oh, where do you think the origin is and where do you think the insertion is? Have you noticed? Direct attachments tend to be the, these are so smart, origin. Yep. And if that wasn't obvious to you, don't sweat it because you have a growth mindset, you're learning, so whatever. Whereas tendons tend to, not always, be the insertion point. Okay, so if this thing's gonna shorten, when it shortens, what's gonna happen to your jaw? Is it gonna open it or is it gonna close it? Remember, the insertion point is gonna go closer to the origin, so it's gonna close your jaw. Nice job. Now, do you think that's about power or precision? Yeah, it's about power, right? So in your temporalis muscle, your motor units look more like this one, where you have 1,000 muscle fibers per axon. Versus you actually, for each one of your eyeballs, you have 6 little muscles that are moving around your eyeballs like this. And right, you want, if you want to look at, you want precision, right, in your eyeballs, in these tiny little muscles. And so those are your external ocular eyeballs, and those are all about precision. Where else do you tend to have a lot of precision? Hands, right? So you tend to have more precision motor units in your hands, power units and things like your legs, chewing. That was fun. Okay, bonus crew. If you're gonna do this, here's your challenge. Write a sentence or two that relates to the following terms: muscle fiber, calcium, thin filament. Ooh, you can dig into it: actin, troponin, tropomyosin, your thick filament, your myosin, sarcoplasmic reticulum, and excitation. Excitation means that's what we're talking about with action potential carrying the electrical impulse down to the neuromuscular junction. And that's what excites our muscle. All right, I'll leave you to that. We can talk about it in our Zoom room, what your answers are. But if you're going to do this, right, pause, practice. Right, also in your study guide, the question was about what are some changes to muscle during exercise? Now, broad categories, we could talk about 2 major types of exercise: resistance or anaerobic, and then more aerobic exercise. So think about the difference between a sprinter or somebody that is lifting weights versus somebody who's running a marathon, right? Those are 2, if you look at those Olympic athletes, those 2 different body types, the sprinter versus the marathon runner. So let's talk about changes that happen. With aerobic exercise, where you're walking for long periods of time or you're jogging for long periods of time, you're burning through a lot of energy and you need a lot of oxygen. Aerobic means air, right? Oxygen. So you need to deliver a lot more oxygen and more glucose to those cells. So you see a lot more capillaries in those blood vessels or in those muscles because you need more energy, you need more ATP. You tend to see the number of mitochondria increase, and you also get something called more myoglobin. Myoglobin is a protein that holds on to oxygen. So you can think of it as like oxygen storage tanks for your muscle cells. Versus resistance exercise, so things like weightlifting or really quick sprints. This is what builds the bulk of a muscle, is doing resistance exercise. How do you get bulk? Well, it turns out you don't actually, you rarely, they think, make more muscle cells. It's just each one of your muscle cells gets bigger. It adds more myosin and actin to each one of your muscle cells. You also get more mitochondria. You still need some more energy to do all that heavy lifting. You also get more connective tissue. Kind of makes sense, right? If you're going to build more bulk to your muscle, you need more help. You need more support. So you also build more connective tissue. Whew. While we're talking about muscle strength, what are factors that contribute to muscle strength? Well, 2 big ones. One is the number of myofibrils in a cross section, right? So when you're lifting weights, you're increasing the number of myofibrils. And that means if I were to take my bicep and cut it in half here, I wore the wrong shirt, cut it in half this way, right? My cross section, before never having lifted weights, and then I come back and then I lift weights every other day for 3 years, and I come back and I'm like, oh, my muscle's bigger, right? And my cross section's bigger. I should be stronger. And then also something called recruitment, which is the number of cells excited at the same time. So inside of your muscle cell, you're going to have hundreds of different motor units, right? And anytime you contract a muscle, you're not using all of your motor units at once. You can, through practice of doing exercises, teach your body to recruit more motor units at once. And that's part of what makes us stronger. It's just getting more muscle fibers to contract simultaneously. Let's talk about lab. So I'm trying to give you less things to click. The next survey, I'll find out if this was working for you or not. Okay, in your lab, in that study guide, one of the questions is, what muscles are used for intramuscular injections? Meaning that I don't want to put something directly into the blood vessels. I want to put it into the muscles and it's going to disperse through and make its way into the blood. Okay. So the key thing here is I do not want to damage a nerve, putting a needle in a nerve, no, or pierce a blood vessel. Like, right, if I stick a major needle through a blood vessel, you can imagine that's going to put a hole in a blood vessel. That's not so great. Okay. So, places where this happens. And when I ask nurses, what are the muscles that you need to know? They're like, they need to know these ones. So first of all, your deltoid, right? Your shoulder muscle. That the chromium process is part of the scapula, and that's what you can kind of feel, and you feel down. And the injection site's here, kind of in the bulky mass of your deltoid. You're not going to hit a nerve or a major blood vessel there. Then two of the quadriceps. So quadriceps meaning four. So this is the top of your thighs, or if we're using our anatomical directional terms, we would not say top, we would say yep, you could say that. Or you could say, yeah, you could say both ventral, or you could say anterior. Good job. So on the lateral side, you have a quadricep known as your vastus lateralis, vastus meaning vast, big, lateral being on the lateral side of the body. The rectus femoris, rectus after erect, meaning straight up and down. So this is the muscle that goes straight up and down your femur, rectus femoris. And both of those, in those areas, you can do an intramuscular injection, not hit a major blood vessel or a nerve. And the final one is your gluteus medius. Notice, not the gluteus maximus. The issue with the gluteus maximus is underneath that, you see this thing right here? This is the sciatic nerve. If you put a needle through the gluteus maximus, you might damage that sciatic nerve, and that will not make anybody happy. So it comes in from the side, that gluteus medius that we talked about before that helps abduct your leg. That's the site for injection. Cool. The other thing I want you to know for lab is start playing with this idea of agonist and antagonistic movement. So anytime you do a movement, you have a muscle that's called the prime mover. It's the muscle that's doing most of the work. So in this case, it would be my bicep here, right? And this is called elbow flexion. Good job, right? So that's my prime mover. It's also called my agonist. Now for every agonist, just like every movie, there's a good antagonist, right? So while I'm contracting my agonist, I am stretching my antagonist. Now, how do I extend my elbow? Oh yes, I use my triceps. So now I'm going to contract my triceps. So now my triceps is contracting and getting shorter. And what's happening to my biceps? You are correct. It is lengthening. I'm relaxing my bicep. So in this case, when I flex my elbow, this is the agonist. My triceps is the antagonist. When I extend my elbow, now it's flipped. Now my triceps is the agonist and my bicep is the antagonist. So these are often referred to as antagonistic pairs of muscles. Flexion, extension. I can also have synergists. So synergists can assist the movement. They can also help stabilize things, in which case they're called fixators. In the case of your elbow flexion, you have something called the, brachialis. Yeah, your brachialis. Anyway, when you're holding a cup, you might see that thing pop up. My friend who I learned muscles with called it the beer drinking muscle. You're into that? Okay. Just notice you Anytime you move stuff, there are also synergists involved that are helping to smooth that movement, support that movement, maybe keep another joint stable so that it doesn't make another movement all wonky. Okay. Notice extensors, flexors, right? They are on opposite sides of the bone. You see that? Extensors, flexors of the wrist on opposite sides of the limb. Why does that pattern exist? We'll talk about that in the Zoom room. Here's another pair. Quadriceps, hamstrings. Knee extenders, knee flexors. Why are they on opposite sides of the joint? Here's another fun question. Your body has 206 bones and over 600 muscles. There's still some debate on the exact number. But given that you have learned about muscles this week, why do you think the body needs many more muscles than bones? For lab, your assignment, do your mastering A&P. You also have a muscle movements assignment. The details are there for you to read through, but basically in your study guide, I've given you a list of muscles to get familiar with. When you consider there's over 600, it is a small sample. And what we're doing this week is we're adding muscles to the movements that you learned last week. Kind of fun, huh? And what you'll be doing is sketching those muscles on some skeletons. I've given you some skeletons to print out, or if that is not available to you or you're not interested in that, you could draw stick figures and label the bones. I'm good with that. What I'm interested in is you understanding where the origins and insertions are. For example, for the pectoralis, right? The origins on the sternum and the clavicle, the insertions on the humerus, and then what's the movement there? Well, that's going to be shoulder flexion. And then what's its antagonist? Latissimus dorsi, origin, insertion, extension. You're going to do that for 5 sets. Don't use this example. You have plenty of other examples to use. That's all I've got. I'll see you in class. Now there should be the blooper reel, right? That would be fun. You get all the bloopers already embedded in it. Like these moments when I'm like, where's the button?